Hello and welcome dear students to Unlock series. Today we shall have a class on literary criticism and we shall deal with Matthew Arnold as a literary critic in this class. I'm sure you have learnt about Matthew Arnold in Victorian poetry that was prescribed in History of English Literature during semester 3. So we shall not look into the biographical details but only think of this great man as a critic. Matthew Arnold is one of the greatest critics in English literature and forms a solid critical edifice with Dryden, Dr. Johnson and Coleridge before him. That is, along with Dryden, Dr. Johnson and Coleridge, Matthew Arnold provides a solid foundation for English literary criticism, a firm foundation for English literary criticism. Coming as he did in the Victorian age, he had to come to terms with the pressures of the time, its materialism and want of faith. He describes the condition of England through the last lines of Dover Beach, and I know you are very familiar with the last lines of Dover Beach. And we are here as on a darkling plain, swept with confused alarms of struggle and flight, where ignorant armies clash by night. So this was the condition of England. And in such a condition, Arnold felt that poetry could provide self-assurance and nourishment for mankind. So here begins Arnold as a critic. Arnold began as a poet and defined poetry as, at bottom, a criticism of life under conditions fixed for such a criticism by the universal laws of poetic truth and poetic beauty. This very definition given by Arnold about poetry defines his role as a critic in his time. If we look into it, we can find that it's an affirmation of the poetic theories that had been put forward by the past masters, with this addition that it cautions poets against excess of romantic emotionalism and exuberance of expressions. So Arnold is issuing a word of warning, a caution to poets against excess of romantic emotionalism and exuberance of expressions. Matthew Arnold was a romantic at heart who preached classicism as a critic. The poet and the critic balanced each other, producing a definition that is still quoted when poetry is discussed. His critical premise can be seen in his works, namely the Essays in Criticism, The Function of Criticism at the Present Time, and a preface to the volume of 1853 poems. Arnold's first critical statement appeared in 1853, prefaced to his own poems. It's about the subject matter of poetry. He tries to explain why he has omitted his famous Empedocles on Etna from this collection. So earlier he had published a collection of poems called as Empedocles on Etna. In the next edition, he omitted this poem, namely Empedocles on Etna. And in the preface to this collection, he explains why he has omitted Empedocles on Etna. He tells us that this particular poem, namely Empedocles on Etna, is a poem of introspective sentimentality. To Arnold, poetry should choose as its subject matter action, great action that has a hold upon the permanent emotions of the human heart. Action should be constructed. It should be expressed in a language that subserves the action. So action, construction and expression are the three significant elements in the making of poetry, and that we have already learned from the Greeks. So the preface is a plea for classical restraint and discipline in art. With this, Arnold effects his break with the romantic tradition. So he is dealing with the subject matter of poetry, and he tells us, or he cautions poets against excess of romantic emotionalism and exuberance of expressions. So he tells us about the subject matter of poetry. It should be action, and then it should be constructed in a language that subserves the action. But the most remembered Arnoldian statement on poetry is the definition that poetry is at bottom a criticism of life under conditions fixed for such a criticism by the universal laws of poetic truth and poetic beauty. The word criticism in this definition is a real problem because we know that poetry is thought to be creation. Arnold is therefore hard put to explain his terms. In his On Translating Homer, the study of poetry and the essays on Wordsworth and Byron, he attempts the explanation. By criticism, he means the application of ideas to life in order to interpret art. These ideas can be found in the cultural milieu in which the poet finds himself. In the study of poetry, he expands the term idea, the word idea, as high seriousness and truth in subject matter, and a movement and a mellifluity in diction and in style. So what makes a good poem? He tells us high seriousness and truth and sweetness of diction must be the test of good poetry. Great poetry will have the power to form, to sustain and delight. It can comfort and console in moments of crisis. So poetry can even become a substitute for religion. Arnold also mentions two fallacies of estimating poetry. They are the personal fallacy and the historical fallacy. Now, what is the personal fallacy? While evaluating a work of art, the critic may be carried away by his own likes and dislikes and rate the work higher or lower than it deserves to be. That is, a critic can be colored. And depending upon his likes and dislikes, he can evaluate a work of art. This leads to personal fallacy. Okay. Now the second fallacy is called as a historical fallacy. And according to this, again the evaluation, a work of evaluation can become defective as the critic's judgment may be affected by the circumstances in which the work was written. That is, while evaluating a work of art, the critic may be carried away by the historical circumstances in which the work was written. So that is historical fallacy. So then how can you judge a work of art? To the question as to how we can judge or evaluate a work of art, Arnold puts forward his famous touchstone method. Now, as per the touchstone method, great passages from past masters must be learned by heart and used as touchstones to detect poetry that is a genuine criticism of life. Arnold quotes passages from Homer, Dante, Milton and Shakespeare. So just as you can test the purity of metals by rubbing it on a touchstone, you can learn passages from past masters like Homer, Dante, Milton and Shakespeare, and then you can compare the work that is to be evaluated with passages taken from writers like Homer, Dante, Milton or Shakespeare. So it is a method of comparing. You are trying to understand or to evaluate the work that you need to evaluate. And so you are comparing it with great writers. And this method is called as the touchstone method. He also compares the French poetry of the 12th and 13th centuries with Chaucer's work to prove this point. And Arnold says that Chaucer in fact is superior because his works have a liquidity of diction and a fluidity of movement. So these qualities make Chaucer superior to the French writers. But again Arnold opines, he is of opinion that Chaucer lacks seriousness, which according to Aristotle is a marker of good poetry. Another phrase that Arnold has made popular is grand style. It is in his lecture on Homer that Arnold uses the term grand style. He associates it with nobility of nature, profound thought, power of passion, and elevation of diction, and we understand that he is in fact echoing Longinus, and Longinus spoke of these 5 sources in his On the Sublime, which we had already discussed. In the matter of elevated style, his meaning is that it should be simple, direct and fluent. It must have movement and energy. In English, this is to be found in Milton. In his essay on Milton, he says that Milton is a substitute for Homer in English and that Milton's style should be accepted without questioning. But we know that in the 20th century, Arnold came to be questioned because Milton's style was attacked for its corruption of language and its use of English as if it were Latin. Criticism is defined by Matthew Arnold as a disinterested endeavor to know and propagate the best that is known and taught in the world so that a current of fresh and healthy may be set up. So he defines criticism as a disinterested endeavor to know and propagate the best that is known and taught in the world so that a current of fresh and healthy ideas may be set up. This definition shows how Matthew Arnold has a high conception of the function of criticism. Criticism is not concerned with literature only. All knowledge is its province. The best that is known and taught in the world is found in philosophy, theology and history as much as in literature. So that means that the perspective that Arnold recommends is very wide. He does not confine himself to English literature, he talks of world literature. Arnold was well read in French and German literatures, and towards the end of his life he wrote on Tolstoy. And by world literature he means more than European literature. He looks backward to classical literature of ancient Greece and Rome and the literature of ancient India as an invaluable legacy of the mind ready for the disinterested endeavor to know the best that is known and taught in the world. So what is criticism? It is a disinterested endeavor to know and propagate the best that is known and taught in the world. The word disinterested is another key to criticism. Arnold compares it to the Indian detachment or yoga. Attach then detach is the direction given by Arnold. You immerse yourself in a work without surrendering your ability to understand and judge, keeping a critical distance even when absorbed in the act of enjoyment. So you attach yourself to your work, you enjoy the work, and then there is the act of detachment. The detached part is a critical part which is preserved for judgment. I hope you can understand that. You attach, you enjoy, and then detach, and the detached part is the critical part which is preserved for judgment. Okay. The judgment will be at once moral and aesthetic, high seriousness and truth in morality, and sweetness of diction in aesthetics. So when you are disinterested, you develop the ability to see the object as in itself it really is. This is how the detachment part works. It enables the critic to see a work of art as in itself it really is. Now, one fundamental question discussed by Arnold is the nagging conflict between creation and criticism. Creation is any day superior to criticism, but Arnold cautions us against any facile conclusions. No one would prefer Johnson's Irene to his Lives of Poets. Therefore, criticism and creation must be looked upon as complementary activities. In the history of literature also, we find them to be so. Literature is a product of applications of ideas to life. Ideas are there for poets to use. But when ideas are absent or when ideas are scarce, the quality of literature drops. Arnold thinks that much of the poetry of Wordsworth's time is premature and imperfect for want of ideas current in the ambient culture. There was a Periclean age to usher in Sophocles. There was the Renaissance that threw up Shakespeare. Sophocles and Shakespeare are great writers because they had great ideas available to them. In the absence of noble ideas, Arnold says, the Romantics wrote poor quality poetry. Creation may be superior to criticism, but cannot do without criticism. And criticism by definition propagates the best that is known and thought in the world, and that thereby creates a current of fresh and true ideas. For the poet to produce something of great quality and substance, he has to put great critical effort behind it. And therefore, Arnold finds Byron's poetry deficient, while Goethe's poetry is nourished by a great critical effort providing true materials for it. So we understand that Matthew Arnold stands out as the most important critic of the latter half of the 19th century. And later critics like T.S. Eliot and F.R. Lewis have shown allegiance to Arnold's system of beliefs. He can also be, that is, Matthew Arnold can also be seen as a new voice in criticism. So as a critic, we have now understood how Matthew Arnold talks about the subject matter of poetry and how he has defined the function of criticism. So I hope you have understood Matthew Arnold as a critic. Thank you. Stay safe and take care.